Good morning, children. Let's move over to the second part of this lesson, human settlements. But let me just go over to what we had studied in the previous session. We had discussed about rural and urban settlements. Now, in rural settlements, we find the population is very less. On the other hand, in urban settlements, the population is more. But when we compare the size of population of many of the villages in India with those of Europe and even say United States, we find the population of our villages is more than the towns which are seen in these developed countries. We had also discussed about the various settlement patterns, that is compact or nucleated settlements where houses can be seen along river valleys, or even say dispersed or scattered settlements where houses are seen wide apart. Okay, children, now let's move over to the second part of this lesson. What is rural settlements? Now, rural settlements are most intimately and directly associated with the land. So, rural settlements are mostly associated with land. They're usually seen in rural areas or in the villages. And what is the occupation of the people in the rural regions? Yes, they are primary activities. So, they are controlled by primary activities like agriculture, fishing, etc. So, people who are in the rural regions usually practice primary activities like agriculture, then you have fishing, lumbering, mining, etc. Some factors influencing the location of rural settlements are water supply. So what is the first important factor which influences the location of rural settlements? The first one is water supply. And all of us know the importance of water. Okay, so usually we find rural settlements are seen near water bodies like rivers, springs, lakes, etc., where water can easily be obtained. And we've also seen that most of the ancient civilizations of the world have flourished along the banks of rivers. So, rural settlements are seen near water bodies like rivers, springs, lakes, etc., where water is easily available. Water is also used to water the farms, fishing can be done, and rivers and lakes can also be used for transport. So, water is used for many purposes. It's used to water the farms for irrigation purposes. Fishing can also be done along the rivers and lakes, and rivers and lakes are also an important means of transport and communication. Apart from that, you also know water can also be used for generation of hydroelectricity as well as for recreational purposes. The next important factor on which rural settlements depend on is land. People always prefer to settle near fertile lands fit for agriculture. Okay, so wherever land is available, that is, say, along the river valleys or in the flat plains, people prefer to settle near these regions because they are fertile and agricultural activity can easily be carried out. Upland, which is not inclined to flooding, was adopted to prevent damage to houses and loss of life. So normally you find people prefer to live along the upland regions because these regions are not prone to flooding. Again, it is also to prevent damage caused to houses as well as loss of life. So, people, though they prefer to live along the banks of rivers, which offer fertile lands for agriculture, it is also prone to flooding. So, upland regions are preferred. In low-lying river basins, people prefer to settle on terraces and leaves which are dry points. Okay, now what are terraces? Okay, now all of you would have understood what terraces are. See, along the mountainous regions, crops can be grown along terraces to prevent the erosion of soil. Okay, and so in low-lying river basins also, people prefer to settle on terraces and leaves which are dry points. These are regions which are not inclined to flooding. Now, what about tropical regions? Now, in tropical regions, you find these regions receive plenty of water from the rains. So, these regions have, usually find the land becomes, during the rainy season, it becomes flooded, and hence you find it becomes very difficult to build houses, and you find houses are built on stilts. Okay, so if you see the marshy lands, you find in all these regions, you find houses are built on stilts. In tropical countries, people mount their houses on stilts near marshy lands to defend themselves from flood, insects, or animal pests. So in India, you find the terai regions of the Himalayas, which are always flooded and marshy. You find houses are built on stilts. And this is to defend themselves from floods and also from insects or even wild animals. At the same time, houses are also seen in forest clearings. So wherever forests are cleared, you find houses are constructed in these forest clearings because wood is always abundant in the forests. Now, another important region where houses can be constructed are usually the higher grounds or on top of the hills. Now, these are forts. Now, forts are actually constructed on higher grounds or hills to, offer as a defense mechanism. Okay, so then of course you might be very familiar with many of the forts which were built during the time of Shivaji Maharaj. Forts were built to keep an eye on the surrounding region for the purpose of defense. Okay, children. So what have we learned? We have learned about rural settlements, and we have learnt about places where rural settlements can be built, that is regions where we have plenty of water supply. And second is land, that is land which is fertile and fit for agriculture, and along the banks of rivers are fit for settlements. Settlements can also be constructed along terraces and leaves. In regions which are prone to excessive flooding, houses are built on stilts to prevent flooding and also to keep away from insects and animal pests. Villages are also constructed in forest clearings and also along the higher grounds or in the hilly regions. Next we come to rural settlement patterns. Patterns of rural settlements indicate the way the houses are placed in relation to each other. The position of the village, the neighboring topography and the terrain impact the size and the shape of a village. So what is exactly, impacts the size and shape of the village? It is the position of the village and also the topography and the terrain of the region. So rural settlements are classified based on the following criteria. Based on setting. So based on setting, we can classify rural settlements as those which are constructed along the plains. I call them as plain villages, or if the settlement is along the coastal region, we call them as coastal villages. If it is constructed along a plateau, we call it as plateau villages, or in deserts, it is a desert village and forest villages. So, based on setting, we can classify rural settlements as plains, coastals villages, plateau villages, desert villages and forest villages. Now next we come to function. Now based on the function, we can classify villages as farming, if farming is the chief occupation, or if lumbering is the occupation of these villages, we call it as lumberjacks villages. Now, if fishing is carried out in these villages, we call it as fisherman's village. And pastoral villages, okay, so based on function, we can classify them as farming, lumberjacks, fishermen's, or even if sheep rearing or raising of goats, etc. is carried out, we call them as pastoral villages. Now next is based on forms or configuration of settlements. Now based on form or configuration of settlements, we can divide the settlements as linear, rectangular, T-shaped villages, or it can be a circular, star-like village or cross-shaped village. Okay, so based on form or configuration of settlements, these may be a number of geometrical patterns or shapes. Okay, you can have a number of shapes based on configuration of forms, and houses can be arranged either in a linear way or in a rectangular fashion, or it can be a T-shaped village or even a circular star-like village if it is arranged in a circular manner, or if it is arranged in the form of a star, it can be a star-like village or cross-shaped villages. Okay, children, so I think you have understood this lesson till here. We'll continue rural settlements in the next session. Thank you, children.